Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
And the aliens would mind meld and give them the technology. They're bad aliens. So are you surprised the Nazis were influenced by demons?
No, if demons are real, I would definitely think they'd be on the side of the Nazis.
Yeah.
McDonald's is connected to the Clintons. They chop up the bodies and put them into the sausage and hamburgers. People are being cannibalized. Look it up.
And I'm watching CNN talk about this as violent white nationalist protests. We have done everything in our power to keep this peaceful, you know?
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Welcome to Yeah Nah Pasaran, a show about fascism and its gravediggers. I'm Cam Smith.
I'm Andy Fleming.
And joining us from Trump's America, it is our American correspondent, Jason Wilson. Thanks for joining us, Jason.
Always a pleasure.
Now, Jason, we spoke to you late last year, just before the election. If I may quote you directly,
Yep.
she'll be right.
Ahead.
She'll be right, mate. Joey B's got this in the bag, baby. I think those were your exact words. That sounds like you.
It was, you're paraphrasing lightly, but yeah, something like that. Yeah, well, obviously I was overly optimistic as the general, everything that's happened in the last couple of months, and especially in the last week, will tell you that I was being overly optimistic.
Now, Jason, let's talk about Pete Hegseth.
Yeah.
Because you've been following some of the people in his orbit for quite some time, and it seems like everything's coming up. Wilson, it's all paid off. Firstly, I would have thought that, like, if this guy was collecting maybe hundreds of guns and he had the beliefs that he does, it's the sort of thing where someone would be calling the federal government. But it seems now he wants to collect millions of guns and the federal government's calling him. What's going on with Hegseth?
Yeah, so he, as listeners may well know, he's now being confirmed as the Secretary of Defense. So that means he's in charge of the US Department of Defense. He's at the head of the largest bureaucracy in the world by some, depending on how you count it, as well as 5,000 nuclear warheads, give or take. So yeah, the Secretary of Defense is a senior cabinet role. They're in charge of the Department of Defense, which means the US Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and of course the Space Force. So yeah, it's a pretty important job. He has never run anything with more than 20 staff. And when he tried, in both cases, he ran a couple of nonprofits that basically went out of business. There have been credible accusations against him of sexual assault, many witnesses attesting to his habit of public drunkenness and alcoholism. But my reporting has been a little more high-minded than that. I've been looking at his connections to, well, his ideas, I guess. I wrote a few stories about the books he wrote. He's written about 4 of them now. By the way, his immediate background is that he's a weekend presenter of Fox and Friends on the Fox News network here in the US. So he's like a reserve grade Sean Hannity. And yeah, he's the Saturday and Sunday guy. So he's been a conservative personality for some time. His sort of place in that firmament actually precedes Trump, and early on in Trump's career, he was a Trump critic, actually. He was more of a neoconservative. He got on that talking head circuit by being a veteran, a combat veteran who had some ideas about counterinsurgency and how the US Army could better conduct itself in the global war on terror. But yeah, he adapted to the times, and President Trump's appointees have this at least in common, that they look good on telly. And Hegseth certainly fits that bill, even if he's got no other real qualifications. But yeah, he's put a lot of his thoughts out in public in the form of these books, and also on some podcasts that I dug up in my most recent story, where he has a chat with some people from his church. So his church, he moved his entire family to Tennessee in the first instance for his kids to attend what's called a classical Christian school. I'm not sure if classical Christian education has made many inroads in Australia, but it's a big deal on the Christian right here, where issues like school choice, people wanting to opt out of public school, have their own schools, have those funded by the government are a pretty big deal. And his most recent book he wrote with a guy who was actually the president of the Association of Classical Christian Schools here in the United States. And that organization and classical Christian schooling are also very closely associated with a pastor by the name of Doug Wilson, who's out of Moscow, Idaho. Doug Wilson has been, let's say, a controversial figure over the years. He is a Christian Reconstructionist. He says he's not, but he refuses that label, but effectively he's a Christian Reconstructionist, which means that he really wants government to sort of be run according to biblical law and a particular interpretation of biblical law, which includes Old Testament prohibitions on adultery and homosexuality, things like that, and maybe some Old Testament punishments as well for those kinds of infractions. And he's also caused a lot of ructions in Moscow by really trying to throw his weight around there. There have been accusations that the church has harbored people who have been either accused or even convicted of child sexual abuse type offences. Wilson has also, I wrote some stories about his church, which is called Christ Church, back in 2021, but he's been covered to death. It's actually a struggle sometimes to find anything new to say about the guy because he's been mired in controversy for so long. He also, I think one of his first brushes was he wrote this pamphlet with another pastor where they sort of said maybe that antebellum slavery wasn't such a bad thing, really. And because slavery is biblical. Anyway, his, I guess, a network of churches that's effectively sort of controlled by him. They're what's called Reformed Presbyterian is technically the flavor of religion here. And there's an organization called the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches, CREC. And after moving to Tennessee into a 8,800 square foot house, by the way, that he paid $3.4 million for. Yeah, Hegseth got involved with this church called the Pilgrim Hill Reformed Fellowship. I dug up some podcasts he made with the church where he seems to assent to this idea of sphere sovereignty. Is the idea that, it's got a long history and not all of it not all expressions of it over the years have been as radical as the one you find in Christian Reconstructionism. But in Christian Reconstructionism, it's the idea that there should be three spheres of power, which are the church, the family, and the state. And the church and the family are straightforwardly under patriarchal control. The family is almost entirely responsible for raising children and educating children. The church is responsible for sort of moral guidance and even a lot of adjudication and punishment. And on their view, the state's role is incredibly limited and maybe is just confined to the punishment of crimes. And the state shouldn't be providing education or anything like that. And the state, like the other spheres, should be run in accordance with their interpretation of biblical law. So somewhat antithetical to most mainstream understandings of what the US Constitution says about the separation between church and state, which is why I thought it was newsworthy. I talked to some experts and former participants in this church who confirmed that it was all as bad as it sounds. And yeah, that was like the story. Obviously, before I published the story, he was advanced in his nomination, and I think the vote there was 51-50. After I published the story, there was another vote for confirmation, and Mitch McConnell changed his vote, and it was 50-50, and JD Vance had to do the tiebreaker. So, I don't know. Senator McConnell, if you're reading The Guardian, shout out. Yeah. But obviously, lots of people have been reporting on this guy's his suspect tattoos that perhaps feature iconography that's associated with a variety of far-right movements. His apparent sort of opposition, at the very least, to women in combat roles in the military and maybe to the idea that women should be in the military at all. And that was something that came up in those podcasts as well. I mean, the guy is extremely right-wing, it seems, in overlapping ways. And I unpacked a lot of that. Pretty scary, I got to say, and reactionary and, well, more than reactionary. I mean, Christian Reconstructionism is a kind of almost a revolutionary idea. And certainly one that appears not to see the state as it's currently constituted as legitimate, or at the very least sees mainstream understandings of constitutional government as gravely mistaken, and wants to sort of remake that and really is looking towards theocratic rule. So that's Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense.
How many nukes did you say he has?
It's 5,000 or so, yeah, that the US has, yeah. So quite a lot. I mean, there's this. I mean, the thing I drew out in the last story I did is that he sort of says that he's changed his mind a little. He says that in other ways too. Like, he used to be a neocon and now he's a sort of Trumpian populist. And he talks a little about patriotism in these podcasts. Like, he used to be a US patriot, a conservative US flag-waving patriot. And now he's saying stuff like the Pledge. Listeners may be aware that in the United States in public schools, kids say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. It's I suppose, ritual of civic nationalism. And
something that shouldn't conservatives be right on board with that?
Well, you would think so. And certainly I've been to Joey Gibson rallies where they say the Pledge of Allegiance before the rally starts. And so the civic nationalist conservative is all on board with that. But he's saying that was a way for progressives to sort of replace God at the heart of American life and to get the Bible out of schools. And he's even suspicious about Thomas Jefferson as a deist. And his interlocutor on this podcast was openly calling public schools like a tool of Satan. So, I mean, it's a point of view. It's not a point of view that... Well, we can't say it's not a point of view that we're not accustomed to seeing amongst conservatives, because obviously he didn't come up with it. The religious right and Christian Reconstructionism have existed for quite a long time, but it's not one we're accustomed to seeing expressed by a cabinet secretary, let alone the Secretary of Defense, right? It's far out. But is it even the most far out view expressed by a current Trump administration cabinet secretary? I don't even know. I mean, it's hard to measure, right? Like, it's apples and oranges. Is RFK's vaccine stuff crazier than that? It's hard to say. It's hard to arrive at a standard of comparison.
What's Hegseth's relationship to Project 2025, Jason?
Look, that's a great question, Andy, and I don't know if it's one that I can confidently and definitively answer, in the sense that I'm not sure if any of us know, without sort of looking like the Pepe Sylvia meme with pieces of red string all over a corkboard or whatever. I just feel like there's more than we know and understand currently. There are more subterranean sort of connections and long-time associations between various people in and around the Trump administration. And it's hard to say. In the universe of these kind of right-wing think tanks and nonprofits and Fox News and Trump World, it's hard for me to say what precisely the connections are. Now that I've had a bit of a look into the archive here, I see that Kevin Roberts, who's the head of the Heritage Foundation, said in December he was going to spend $1 million to pressure senators unwilling to back Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. Hegseth's definitely like talking about getting the woke out of the military. Trump's, I believe, there's been a lot going on in terms of executive orders, but I believe Trump wants to stop transgender people serving in the military, of which there are many. It may surprise listeners in Australia that, like, the degree to which transgender men in particular are a real presence in various parts of the United States military. And they want to get any, I guess, equity measures that might exist in the military out of there. I believe there was an announcement today, US time, that there was a whole lot of, there was a wholesale stoppage of any government grants. Like on the face of it, at least, it seems like any government money at all. There's a hold on spending any government money at all, including money that funds the states today. I think, like, what exactly that means is going to be litigated probably, like, in the courts over the next couple of days. But there was specific stuff about the military. So to the extent that the US military has accommodated women in a wide range of roles, including combat roles, to the extent that the US military has been tolerant or supportive of transgender people serving, to the extent that the US military has been accommodating of LGBTQ people in general. They're going to try and stop all of that. And ultimately, I suspect that Hegseth and certainly the people around him, people in the conservative movement, think there's something wrong, unnatural, unholy, whatever word they might use to describe it, about women serving in uniform, that's deeply improper in some existential or metaphysical way. So that's the shake-up I imagine he would be trying to accomplish, and that's entirely, I guess, aligned with the kinds of things that Project 2025 has said that it wants, which is why he's getting the support of people like Kevin Roberts. So it's not about, and look, the combat readiness of the US military is not one of my issues, but that's the thing that you would expect the Secretary of Defense to be preoccupied with. But this guy seems to be preoccupied with carrying out this culture war inside the US military without anyone really explaining in any sensible or detailed way how that's going to improve the performance of that institution. So, yeah. Meanwhile, he's also, I was about to say earlier, throughout his career, he has been implacably hostile to Islam in general and has refused to distinguish between Islam in and of itself and sort of more radical groups who act in the name of Islam. He has criticized the People's Republic of China, not only on the basis of its ideology, but its atheism. So there's a real sense of a religiously derived view of the world will be informing his conduct as a Secretary of Defense in charge of the world's most powerful military.
Well, perhaps briefly before we all get melted by his nuclear war, we may get to enjoy the spectacle of like goth kids in American schools proudly giving the Pledge of Allegiance in defiance of the Christian nationalist masters.
I mean, that will be funny if we get to the point where the Pledge of Allegiance is some act of defiance. I mean, I think, to be clear, thus far, the military is not in charge of schools or any other part of the government. So, and it's not clear to me that his specific views like that are the views of a majority of the Trump cabinet or Trump himself. So
let's not give them any ideas.
No, sure.
Jason, you've also done a bit of reporting on the Oath Keepers based on some spicy Oath Keepers leaks. Could you tell us a little bit about what these leaks were and what you discovered within them?
Yeah, so in the state of Utah, an infiltrator, a long-term infiltrator who was inside, I guess, not just the Oath Keepers, but was in touch with a network of people who were involved in a number of overlapping anti-government or patriot movement groups. So, and we might want to come back to that because that's I think a real insight here that I haven't been able to get out into reporting, but like it's about the network, not the groups, because all of the individuals he was in touch with were involved in more than one named group. So others included the American Patriots, 3%, various election monitoring groups, and he was in Utah, and the main sort of body of the people he was in touch with were in Utah. But these groups, these networks, their activities, people's involvement in various groups stretched into Arizona, Nevada. So I guess the interior of the American West for the most part, maybe a little in Washington and Idaho as well. So yeah, he worked with ProPublica, and they did a big story about his infiltration. I was in communication with him. He's been named by ProPublica, but we don't need to name him here necessarily. I just really used the documents, the chat leak records, the various things he'd exfiltrated to do some additional reporting, and I identified a lot of these people who were at the core, in particular, of the Oath Keepers of Utah, or as they came to call themselves and registered trademarks under this name, Oath Keepers USA, who were not only ongoing Oath Keepers organization after Stuart Rhodes was imprisoned, imprisoned, and of course he's since been his sentence has since been commuted and he's been freed from prison. They weren't deterred by that at all. And in fact, they were vying for control of the overall brand and control of the organisation. Anyway, I identified some of these folks who were involved in all of that. A couple were ex-cops. One, Bobby Kinch, who now lives in Duck Creek, Utah, was a particularly problematic example. He had attracted quite a bit of coverage and controversy back in around 2015, 2016. He was a Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department officer. He made some pretty spicy posts to social media, including one where he appeared to be welcoming the prospect of race war. Another was a picture that showed him pointing a gun at a commemorative plate of Barack Obama. This led to investigations. He launched a lawsuit against the department for discrimination and supported another friend of his within the department who was doing the same thing. Eventually, he left, I guess, under a cloud, but not under discipline or sanction. I mean, he just retired, and some of the stuff that the infiltrator got out were pictures inside his house where he had all of these plaques that the department had given him for his service and stuff. So, but yeah, a cop who had expressed some pretty troubling views, I guess, particularly in respect of race. Part of his history was that his mother had actually been killed in a burglary, and there was no evidence for this, but he convinced himself that it was a gang, a black gang, who had done it in Nevada, which no evidence for that, and that gang activity is not sort of a feature of Las Vegas life necessarily. But yeah, so that was one of the people. He held the trademarks actually for this Oath Keepers organization. So another one of the cops who were involved was a guy by the name of Len Gleim, and he was a highly decorated police officer actually from Fresno, California, and he's also in Utah now. He actually got, I was looking back over the archive of coverage of him, the Fresno Bee, which is the daily newspaper in Fresno, gave him a thumbs up in 2008 because he was the winner of the International Organization of Asian Crime Investigators and Specialist Lifetime Achievement Award, because he had been working on Southeast Asian gangs since 1987. So he was an expert witness in various federal trials involving Hmong gangs in the American West. And yeah, like it was a little bit of a blast from the past. I guess he started this in 1987. There was a lot of coverage of his stuff in the 1990s. And from memory, that's about when Southeast Asian gangs were object of moral panic in Australia. Andy, I don't know if you remember my timing there, if that's correct. When Alan Jones and the like were going on about that stuff around that time as well. Yeah, from the late 80s, I reckon.
Yeah, oh yeah, yep.
Yeah. So others in this group included a guy who's currently a deputy city attorney in Utah and a guy who used to sit on a city council. So the overall impression I had was that, yeah, the imprisonment of Stuart Rhodes after the Oath Keepers had been central to the insurrection in 2021. I had records of meetings that happened a year, 2 years after that, or like at the beginning of 2024. And all of these people who, ex-cops, like lawyers, prosecutors, there's a guy who owns a computer shop in their computer repair business. Like, it's like the roster of the Elks Club or the Lions Club or something, but they're all in the Oath Keepers after the Oath Keepers have been identified as a threat to the United States government. So that was eye-opening to me. It just seems like in conservative culture in the US now, there's no taboo whatsoever about involving yourself in what might have been once seen as unacceptably radical anti-government groups, even by a lot of conservatives. That's all disappeared. And I've reported it all out. I named them. As far as I know, there have been no consequences whatsoever, and I haven't even seen any follow-up reporting in their local area. So I guess that's another piece of good news. Being an Oath Keeper is no longer a problem in provincial Utah, in small-town America.
Or a Proud Boy, for that matter, it seems.
Yeah.
What do you make of, were you surprised that Trump released or commuted the sentences of 1,600 insurrectionists? What does it mean? It wasn't not surprising, perhaps, but
not surprised. I think that everyone up to and including J.D. Vance, who thought that he might stop short of pardoning violent offenders, he sort of humiliated Vance a little, who publicly said, of course, he wouldn't pardon violent offenders. That turned out to be not true. No, I think that Trump, as much as anyone else, is a prisoner of the mythology of the MAGA movement. And according to that mythology, these people did nothing wrong. At worst, it was a sort of a protest or a party even that sort of got a little out of control. At best, it was maybe all the fault of FBI provocateurs. It was exaggerated. They were provoked either by infiltrators or by police violence, and they've got their martyr as well. There's a real sense in the MAGA movement that these people did nothing wrong, that, in fact, the election was stolen and that justifies everything else that they might have done. It sends out a pretty decent signal to anyone else who in the future might want to commit violence on behalf of Trump, or even commit violence and with some fig leaf of pro-Trump justification. It releases onto the streets a whole bunch of people who have proven that they're willing to commit acts of violence on behalf of Donald Trump. It puts in immediate danger anyone, former partners, children, wives, family members whose conscience may have led them to assist in convicting these people, many of whom have records of domestic violence as well. I mean, it's a disaster. It seems to me that if you want to throw petrol onto the blaze of a sort of fascist uprising, impunity is the most effective accelerant, right, for this stuff. Like, I saw that in the streets of Portland, right? I mean, these guys kept coming back month in, month out because there were never any consequences, and that led to an escalation of tactics, of violence. Some of those guys, like Ethan Nordine, ended up in DC, and they were just doing what they'd been doing throughout the Trump era, just out of sight of the national media. Now they've been offered this sort of new level of impunity where, like, they're going to be able to, they're going to feel empowered to commit sort of federal crimes in the safe in the knowledge that the FBI under Kash Patel is not going to go after them. Federal prosecutors appointed by Trump aren't going to go after them. So, yeah, it seems like impunity is about the worst thing that can happen if you're hoping to contain this sort of stuff. But I don't know. I mean, that's maybe informed by my historical perspective as far as that goes.
Something that it brings to mind for me is we've just seen this week in Australia, there's been a little bit of a crackdown on some of our local neo-Nazis. I saw the police in WA, for example, maybe the police commissioner saying that the sight of police marching alongside neo-Nazis is one that he doesn't particularly like, and so that in future they will crack down on them before they can march alongside them, protecting them, which is something that often happens. And we've seen a lot of charges being thrown at neo-Nazis in Adelaide over the Australia Day weekend, but I'm not entirely convinced that they're going to stand up. So it seems that impunity is gone for the moment, as we see people getting hit with like loitering charges, but I do wonder what the effect is going to be when all of those charges fall apart in court.
Yeah.
And it's possible that just more laws is not the answer either. But maybe no laws is not the answer as well. Yeah.
I mean, the thing, I guess the other dynamic here is sometimes it's an excuse, but sometimes in the past, law enforcement genuinely has been hemmed in by the First Amendment. So a constitutional right to sort of like free assembly and free speech and consequences for law enforcement agencies if they infringe anyone's First Amendment rights. But like, I mean, I guess Victoria has a Bill of Rights, right? But the Australian Constitution doesn't have one. So, I mean, what is their excuse? Is it just like they can't make the charges stick? But there's no sort of right to assembly as such in Australia, is there? I mean, they can break up whatever protests they like.
Yeah, pretty much.
Anyway, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I guess what you're bringing up there is the maybe the criminal justice system didn't sort of solve this problem because the criminal justice system itself is fundamentally flawed and exists for the purposes of the state and not for the purposes of justice. Still, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's going to be consequences arriving from elsewhere either. I'm not sure what to do. But either way, it seems like, would you agree that setting them all free is a pretty bad message? It sets up some bad incentives.
I would agree that it's less than ideal.
Yeah.
Speaking of community-based responses to these things, though, it seems like this guy that infiltrated these groups was taking part in a long-standing tradition of just being a guy and going and doing it. Is that what happened here?
That is
just
true.
A bloke?
He was just a guy. I haven't. The ProPublica people had already done this, so I didn't actually. I've not talked to him yet on the phone or in a voice chat. We've just communicated via Signal. I haven't asked him about his life and his motivations. ProPublica reported that it seems like maybe he was like a little bit of a prepper, a little bit like sort of not completely divorced from the fringes of that world himself, but was appalled by the insurrection and decided to do something about it. And yeah, I mean, that's not the first time that like I've had a dude show up with information like that, or people, men, women, whatever. And yeah, that's great. And people do it at great personal risk and provide sort of valuable information that reporters can then put on the public record. So that's all to the good. Again, though, I mean, I'm not aware that any consequences have arisen from that for the folks who have been involved. And that's, I guess, the change in atmosphere that's happened, even by comparison with the first Trump administration, where the FBI still investigated this stuff. There was more stigma, it seems to me, attached to being involved with this stuff. I don't like the framework of things being normalized because, I don't know, political violence and radical right organizing and paramilitary vigilantism that are actually pretty normal in United States history. They're not abnormal anyway. But like, I'm not sure what other word to use or how else to describe it except as a change in temperature. Like, there's the mood has shifted. And not only the mood, I mean, Trump's appointments and stuff and the signals he's sending are having this effect as well, particularly on federal agencies. But it just doesn't seem like there's as much of a price for people to pay for involving themselves in, paramilitary, implicitly anti-government, anti-state, explicitly anti-left, anti-liberal organizing. It just doesn't seem to be as much of a problem if you're doing that. That's a concern. I mean, we can have a discussion about carceral solutions and the criminal justice system or whatever, but you would hope at least that these people's neighbors would sort of extract some social cost, and I'm just not even sure that that's happening anymore, particularly, I guess, in those parts of the country where Trump supporters are in the majority, where Trump supporters control city government or state government. It may, in fact, be the people who are rightly appalled or afraid that that's happening who are in the minority and who are the ones paying a social cost for their opposition to it. And that's just, maybe we could just put a pin in that. I can't say for sure that that's universal or what that's happening. It's just a vibe I'm getting just on the basis of the impact that reporting I did in the past had compared to what I see it having now.
Well, Jason, what I'm getting is that the loony left wants it to be illegal to commit political violence and to start a nuclear war. Is that right?
They want to cancel those people.
Yeah. Well, if people want to read more about that, your work is on The Guardian and people can find you on Blue Sky. Jason Wilson, thank you so much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you. Good to chat.
Well, Andy, that is our program. We will be back next week. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Wondering what's on the horizon for nuclear threats and what we can do about it? Join us at Catalyst Social Centre on the 1st and 2nd of February for workshops, films, panel discussions and actions. We'll be discussing it all from nuclear energy, weapons, waste, histories of resistance, AUKUS and uranium mining. A weekend of knowledge exchange and movement building organised by Old Country Cooling. Find more information on their social media and we'll see you there. Old Country Calling is a 3CR supporter.
Join us for the launch of the Queer Histories, Queer Futures audio tour podcast. Documenting the collective histories of LGBTQIA+ organising, activism and community in Merribeck. Thursday, 6th of February, 6 p.m. at the Michelle Guglielmo Park, Brunswick. Featuring a catered picnic, panel discussion and all-ages arts workshop to celebrate the launch of this groundbreaking community history project. All are welcome. Bring your picnic rug. Queer Histories, Queer Futures, launching Thursday, 6th of February, 6 p.m. at Michelle Guglielmo Park, 260 Sydney Road, Brunswick. Merribeck City Council is a 3CR supporter.